Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I've managed to get my hands on a preview version of this model here. This is the Eachine Trashcan 75mm 2S tiny whoop style quadcopter. Now I've looked at a number of these style quadcopters already on the channel and I do like them for indoors. They're a fantastic way to learn to fly, particularly in the 1S configuration. But one of the things that I asked for at Christmas was what you wanted to see in 2019, and one of the things that I got back loud and clear was lots of options under the 250 gram range, and this absolutely fits into that category both with and without batteries. So in this video what I'm going to do is talk about my experience with this thing. This is my first ever 2S version of one of these, so it's been quite an experience for me. Plus this one has come with Betaflight 4.0 pre-installed, so I've also been able to play with a couple of the latest features too. So I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in having a look. You can get it with a number of receivers built in, a FlySky, Spectrum, or an FrSky version. Be aware the FrSky version is a non-EU receiver, so if you have LBT on your radio, I'm not sure that's going to work, or you can get it without a receiver. Motors on here are 0803 15,000 kV motors. The flight controller is actually slightly different depending on the version that you buy. This is the FrSky version because I have FrSky radios here, and it's a Crazy Bee F4 Pro FR firmware target. Built-in 6 amp BL Heli 4-in-1 D-Shot 600 capable ESCs, built-in current meter and built-in voltage meter as well. The FrSky compatible receiver again is for non-EU, so you have to be aware of that if you're going to have an LBT radio and try and use one of these, but it will support with both D8 and D16 protocols, and you can actually set that up in Betaflight 4.0. I'll show you that in a minute. Video transmitter is 25 and 200 milliwatts capable with a little dipole antenna on the top, and I've been flying it on 25 milliwatts and getting some really nice experiences with it. It is smart audio ready, so you can change all of that information from the Betaflight OSD. And the camera inside this thing is a Cadix EOS 2 running NTSC, global wide dynamic range, 2.1mm lens, 1200 TVL lines, and it does a pretty good job. I'll show you the performance of that in a minute. The really nice thing is that camera is mounted in an adjustable mount, so you can change the rake and angle of the camera, and I would recommend if you're flying it outdoors, increase the camera angle significantly, because when you're flying it around it can get up some pretty hairy speeds. But again, more about that in a minute. The batteries for this are, mine came with 4 in the box. They're little single cell 300 milliamp hour cells, and you have to connect 2 of these into the back of the model to power it up. There are in the box of bits also an adapter cable for an XT30, so if you wanted to do an adapter and use a different smaller 2S LiPo battery, which it could absolutely handle a little bit more weight, then you maybe extend your flight times a little bit. So the USB connection is on the bottom. Plug that into a computer and everything bursts into life, including the receiver as well, so you don't have to have the battery connected for that. Just show you the version here. Version 4.0.0 is the one that's currently on this version, and that is working absolutely fine from what I've been doing here. We'll go through very quickly, show you the port. So there's a TBS smart audio for the video transmitter. This is what the configuration looks like. D-Shot 600 has got motor stop turned on, and you're going to have to be careful of that if you're used to bigger machines, because as you lower the throttle it will stop the props. Settings here for the receiver are different, so you can either decide whether you're going to use the D or X series protocol, and this is something that's a little bit different in Betaflight 4.0. So you have to select the right mode here in order to match the selection on the radio when you come to bind. Power and battery looks like this. Onboard ADC for both. PID tuning looks like this. RC rates of 1.2 and 1.3. Super rates of 3/4 and 0.8. So it's not a bad setup at all and is very good for indoors. By default, everything was working on the receiver once I got it bound. More about binding the receiver in a minute. By default, the modes are set up so that auxiliary 1 is your arming switch and auxiliary 2 is for your modes. Now I'm just going to set this up very quickly for the way that I prefer to fly so that it's ready for me when I go to the field. Last thing to do then is just double check that the on-screen display is all working. Again, if you're not sure about the steps to go through with Betaflight to set things up, then do have a look at my Betaflight bind and fly setup tips video. That kind of takes you through all the steps. Once that is all set, then it's just a case of charging the batteries, plugging them in, making sure that everything is all working on the bench, and we can see that it exactly is, which is fantastic. So next job then is go and get some flying footage. So here it is flying around, and as you can see, the camera itself is working really nicely. Considering its size, there's only a couple of times where it's underexposing the ground. This is a winter's morning here in the UK, reasonably bright sky, not a lot of light on the ground, and the sun is really low. And hopefully you can see when I open the throttle, I can really crank this thing over, and it really picks up an awful lot of speed. For me, I think I should have increased the camera angle to be more like a performance 5-inch quad for this kind of outdoor flying. But luckily, it's just a couple of screws on the side of the model to undo the holder for the camera. That's very easy to move around. Flight times, I'm getting between 2 to 2.5 minutes, depend on how aggressive I'm being. So a little bit short for me, but I'm sure if you were flying indoors and weren't opening the throttle in the same way, you'd get an awful lot longer flight time. So in summary, what do I think? Well, for my first ever 2S Tiny Whoop style quad, this is pretty impressive. I love the fact that you can not only fly around indoors, and it works brilliantly for that, but if you want to be a bit of a hooligan, outdoor when I was flying, that video was actually shot in 6 to 8 mile an hour breezes, and the little model didn't care at all. It is very nice flying out of the box, but you do have to be careful if you're used to flying heavier quadcopters. It doesn't fall in the same way as you reduce the throttle. So you really have to be careful of that. It's quite floaty, particularly when you're coming out of speed. This is well under the 250 gram limit. It's about 34 grams without the batteries and a whopping 49 grams with the batteries. It lights up like a Christmas tree. Across the back it has some LEDs along with a little trash can logo, and when it's all lit, those by default are set for the Larsen scanner setting, which is a bit like Knight Rider or the eyes of a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica. Now I would probably turn those on to be red all the time just for orientation support, but to be honest, most of you are going to probably fly this in FPV anyway, but it's handy to have those additional lights to help find it in the grass. When this comes down, there is a buzzer on here, so you might have to look at setting one up using D-Shot, but when it does come down in grass of any length at all, this thing just disappears with it being so small. Do you like the fact it has Betaflight 4.0 on it? It has given me a chance to have a little bit of a play with that. The binding process was really unusual. The manual is very good and kind of takes you through all the different things that you have to do. But for binding, rather than pressing a little button as you power it up and doing all that good stuff, you can go into the CLI command in Betaflight, say bind, and so long as you've got all the right settings in your receiver part of the setup in Betaflight, you can just go on your radio, go through the same binding process as always, and it'll bind up. I love that fact. That's a really cool new feature in Betaflight. Couple of things to consider though. The charger that comes with it isn't fantastic. It's a little USB charger and it will charge the batteries reasonably quickly, but you can only do one at a time. I pulled out this Tiny Whoop battery charger from TBS to give myself a little bit more time in the air and less time sat twiddling my thumbs, because after 2.5 minutes, one pair of batteries is completely empty, so you've only got enough for about 5 minutes of flying as it comes in the box. For smaller areas, you will need to scale the throttle back. It's hovering about 1/3 throttle, and I found that indoors, that throttle control was just a little bit too crazy. Have a look at my video about managing the throttle, using the throttle scale, or maybe even changing the way the throttle works in the radio to give you a nicer, softer throttle response if you're going to fly in any confined areas. If you're flying in a sports hall, it's probably going to be fine. If you're going to try and fly around your own house, unless you have very fine throttle control, this is going to get out of control very quickly. Watch out for the FR Sky receiver. It's non-EU only. Bit of a shame that. I'd like to see Eachine offer EU and non-EU versions for those of us here in the European Union. And be aware that you will need the linear antenna pieces on your reception goggles, and this is how I had my goggle set up, and even with 25 milliwatts I was still getting some very nice range and some lovely flying experiences with this model. So in summary, I've been impressed. Even though this is called a trash can, I'm not going to put this in the bin. This is one of those little models that would be great to learn on, but then also really fun to fly outdoors when it isn't blowing a gale. It is incredibly powerful, and the only downsides really are those very short flight times. But if you're looking for a 2S model, then as this is the first one that I've personally looked at, it's difficult for me to compare it with the others on the market, but I would say this is definitely one to have a look at. Thanks for watching the video and watching right to the very end. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you like the video and like what I'm doing here, then hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon too. If you really like what I'm doing, you can go the extra mile and become one of my Patreons for access to me directly for support, and also giveaways and regular updates too. If you're looking for particular content, then check out the playlist. I organise all of my videos into playlists, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can find everything here. If it's called Introduction To, it's designed to start very simply and build on that simple introduction to teach you all about it. If it's called For Beginners, then that is really aimed at people who are brand new to that part of the hobby. You can also search on YouTube for anything that you're interested in using the search function at the top. So iNav Painless 360 will find all of my videos and even the playlists around iNav. So thanks again for watching, and happy flying.